Yesterday we talked briefly about the forum space, which is the space that we open right at the end of the day, which is a space where we invite everybody to contribute. Before each of it, we have a guest moderator who's been following all the panels of the day and who will be leading the discussion, and you are invited to that. So for today's forum, we invite Cody Asche, who is one of the founding members of the Otolith Group, who is himself an artist and writer, and who agreed to be our moderator today. Please welcome Cody Asche. And we will have all our speakers and moderators of the day with us. No, you can stay here, I think.
Everyone.
If you can come closer, it's going to be more intimate and nicer. Please.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining me. Thanks for joining all of us here today. It's been a long day, but Marie-Hélène and Dulcie invited me to respond to some of the ideas that have been processed throughout the day. So for those who don't know me, my name's Cody Asche. I'm one half of the Otolith Group. We have a video upstairs called O Horizon, which was filmed in Vishva Bharati. And we've also been programming some videos which are in the auditorium. I'm speaking slowly because Otobong is translating for Buba. Okay. So as a result, I've been moving between the auditorium and here. So that means I haven't experienced all elements of the discussion so far. So apologies to anybody whose work I don't reference in sufficient detail. So I'm just going to reflect a bit on how I understand the notion of writing collective history, and then we can begin a discussion on those three notions of writing, of collectivity, and of history. Because for me, a key question is what it is artists do when they write collective history, which is separate from historians or from art historians. What is an artist's history, which is separate from an art historian's history, and separate from an historian's history? So maybe we could begin by returning to the film this morning called, and here I'm going to mispronounce it, Here Be Du Cher, The Struggle Is Not Over Yet in Wolof. The film created, directed, and produced by Buba Touré and Raphael Grisi. And at one point in this film, towards the end, there was a film discussion after the film of the play, in which the Forum Theatre Company, Kadu Yara, discuss the film that we've just seen. And Buba Touré says two things which I think provide a good way into our conversation. He says, a story becomes a story when someone learns about it. And the second thing he says is, the chain should keep moving on. I think these are two profound statements. because they bring us face to face with the question of intergenerational transmission. What are the ways in which generations transmit knowledge from one generation to another? And first of all, what is a generation? We could define generation following the anthropologist David Scott. The Jamaican anthropologist who defines a generation as a temporal institution. As a community bound by a relation to the memory of an event.
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, David Scott defines a generation as a community that is related by their memory of an event. So a community is not only a question of age or a question of date. It is a question of constructing a relation to a memory of an event. And what is powerful about this film, Here Be Doucher, is because we see this process in action. We see the process by which a generation of the present constructs its relation to a memory of the past, which becomes present. This is clearly one of the powerful aspects of the cultural practice of forum theatre. The capacity to dramatize the intergenerational practice and to stage the question of what a generation is. We could even say a generation becomes aware of itself through its enactment of the process of transmission. So it was really a pleasure to begin the day with this profound work. So my second point would be to relate to the tension between memory and history. It is not so much a question of memory versus history as a question of memory as an unreliable condition that sometimes does not become history and other times takes over from history. And which confronts us with the question of what history is and what memory is. And these are large questions, and one way to focus them is around a moment from Ntone Ejagbe's presentation from Cape Town this morning. Ntone said, we at Chimurenga, we are more concerned with memory, with the intangibility of memory, with the unreliability of memory, than we are with contesting history. And this leads us to the question, it leads us to a kind of initial answer to my first question. What is it that an artist's history does that an art history's history cannot do, and that history's history cannot do? What is it that an artist's history can do we could say that an art historian's history and a historian's history is defined by the attempt to manage memory, to manage the unreliability of memory, and to narrate it according to the principles of whatever counts as history. It is as if memory is undermining history, which must be affirmed. But we could say that an artist's history works precisely with the unreliability of memoir, that an artist works with the multiple condition of memory and uses that to multiply the narrations, not so much of history, but of processes of historicization, so that memory becomes the engine of history, or the enzyme of history, rather than a problem for history. A third point that I'd briefly like to talk to is the distinction between the collection and the archive. We can say that there are many definitions of archives. The definitions that we are taught in university, Foucault's definition of the archive of that which can be said, Derrida's definition of the archive as that which is guarded by the archon, A-R-C-H-O-N. But more important than these important definitions is the understanding that within the African continent and within the Asian continent, the question of the archive as the foundation for the writing of history is dominated by the process of lack, by the condition of ruination, by the process of dereliction, and by the process of scarcity, which leads to something that we could call history narrated in the mode of the lament. Or in the mode of the elegy. Or in the mode of pathos. Pathos, pathos. And so we could focus this maybe on Sonia's narration of the contemporary effort to reconstruct and reinscribe the liberation struggles of Guinea-Bissau and of Cape Verde. Yeah, the effort to reconstruct the liberation struggles of Guinea-Bissau and of Cape Verde, specifically to reconstruct the cinematic culture of the liberation struggle from the decay and the ruination of the revolutionary era. Here we confront the understanding that many revolutionary histories are interrupted, discontinuous, and intermittent. That is to say, the material basis of the archive cannot support the uninterrupted narration of history. And so the search for an aesthetic that can narrate an interrupted archive is obliged to meditate upon this interruption. The approach to the archive must be as interrupted as the archive itself. And finally, I'd like to touch on the point of Motion's point about the relation between orality and oral transmission, and the condition of fluidity and liquidity in which oral transmission complicates all of the distinctions that I have drawn upon so far. That is to say, the distinctions between archive and collection, and the distinctions between memory and history, are subject to complexity under conditions of oral transmission, a complexity which then undergoes further complexity under conditions of contemporary platform capitalism. So those are my just initial reactions to what I've heard today. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to hear everything. But maybe we could begin by just talking a bit about this question of intergenerational. Because this seems to me fundamental to the question of what writing is, what collectivity is, what history is and the effort required to articulate these three processes together. And this effort is at the same time the formation of what it means to become a generation. So maybe we could talk a bit about that from any aspect that interests any people, anyone here, but more to the audience than to our guests, because in fact, of course, our guests have been talking all day. So for our audience here who want to respond to any of those points, there's kind of lots of ways into this. And it's just a conversation we're having at the end of the day. So over to you. Anybody want to respond?
Thank you very much, everyone, for a fascinating day, and Kojo for opening today's discussions up to some other ways of thinking about it all. I don't have anything profound to say, but I have a question, because I thought it was really interesting what you said about a generation forming in relation to an event, and I'm paraphrasing terribly. Given what Elizabeth Povinelli was talking about yesterday in the keynote about the collapse of the event, in the contemporary condition that we're living in. I don't know what I think about that, but I wanted to put it on the table to wonder if the way that we collectively relate to events is changing, and if so, if this changes maybe how we constitute a generation. In relation to what Elizabeth Povinelli was talking about in her keynote yesterday morning about the collapse of the event as being one of the 4 axioms of existence, and whether, because of how we described how Kojo described a generation being formed, whether in relation to an event, whether that's going to change, that sort of collective understanding of what we are as a generation, as our relationship to the event changes as well in the contemporary.
I was also just going to add something as well, which is more to do with mediation. So, for example, of that film this morning, where it is a kind of transmission of history through a forum theatre process that becomes a film, but then the film gets screened here, it resonates with other people, and the film itself becomes an event. So, and then it resonates, it takes on, it passes, those processes pass on through other, communities or historical formations, whatever you want to call it. So I'm thinking about who that history belongs to then when it transforms into a different kind of event.
I think this morning when Sonia was talking, there was this aspect of the intergenerational that came up when she was talking about her writing and the fact that when she was doing her research, she did a lot of interviews, and she would come to talk to people who are way more aged than her. And for her, it was very important that when she was writing, when she was doing the research that then became a book, it was important that the voice of those people that she interviewed were present as they were presented to her, instead of her analyzing that. So I think that is also a response to the intergenerational aspect, and also the fact that she is very aware and concerned by her position when she's doing that work. Her not being to be at the center of it because she's the one writing it, but her really thinking of okay, how does she leave space for all the voices who contributed to that work to be heard, and not just her signing the book saying, okay, this is me writing this. So I think that's a very important aspect when we think about intergenerational. And she also spoke about the fact that, for instance, even if she's a researcher, she would go to her community and talk, for instance, to her grandmother, who for her, the grandmother who won't see her as the researcher, but she will be a granddaughter. So that also is something very important in when thinking of your practice and your position when you are facing a certain type of history, or when you are facing like just people who would inform you about events or history that you didn't experience, but you would like to learn from it, and also maybe write about it in different forms, but without really disrespecting it. So I think those are different aspects that came out of her presentation this morning.
Yeah, I thought it was really kind of a profound moment when you talked, Sonia, about the mobile cinema being formed so that an artist like Philippa Cesar could take mobile cinema and take these reconstructed films from the 70s and travel around Guinea-Bissau so that young people in their teens and 20s could come face to face with these cinema from the militant moment of the liberation struggle that they'd never experienced before, so that here the screen is the interface between popular memory, between media history, between history of revolution, and a kind of popular erasure. You know, it is as if memory is the solution within which history dissolves. Popular memory is the liquid that dissolves history. History crystallizes from the fluidity of memory and takes form in front of us. And I know that Philippa's film Spell Real is attempting to catch this process of fluidity and crystallization in the formal way in which she makes this film. And I think it could be related to smooth part of what you're talking about, which is that I think there are many artists working on these questions. Many artists are sensitive to the breakdown in intergenerational transmission, especially in countries that are new, like this one, Bangladesh, a new country, you know, a country that has only been in existence since 1971. That means many people in the summit are older than this country. It's a very recent invention. In these conditions, it's not surprising that there are people who do not know the historical details of the invention of the nation. So you have to invent rituals to bring people face to face with this formation. Exactly.
No, I was just completing what Kojo was just saying, that it's necessary we need this event in order to create this passage and this confrontation. And in the case of Guinea-Bissau, as Kojo has put it, like the mobile cinema was the confrontation moment, and it was, and I think I was not present in the mobile cinema, but I think it's a confrontation. But I talk, at least from my experience, it's a confrontation. It's not you and the screen, it's you, the screen, the generation or the people who have done the struggle, and is a confrontation with you within a collective that's watching the the footage and living it at the moment and thinking it at the moment. So it's not just an intellectual work, but it's a lot of emotional work there involved. And I think these events, in terms of academia, we are divided. But these emotional moments, or at least the feelings of watching and the energy and synergy that goes around at the place when this event is happening, I think that's the confrontation that is embodied, I think.
I think that's a brilliant point. It brings up another distinction, which is the distinction between historicization and commemoration. That countries that are new nation states, countries from after World War II, countries in Asia and Africa and Latin America, they often have a combination of interrupted memory and at the same time an excessive practice of commemoration, state commemoration, like top-down commemoration, at the same time as a lack of popular memorialization, which is a confusing state, you know, to have too much and too little memory simultaneously. In fact, it could be that state commemoration is covering over popular memorialization, in which case then popular memorialization is against state commemoration. The practice of memory is not the same as the practice of commemoration, and neither of these are the same as history.
I'm just going to engage with some of the ideas you threw out because I have not really seen what you're referring to, the events or the films, so I don't know if it's fair for me to engage. So I'm just going to maybe try to engage with something you said about the difference between an artist's history, a historian's history, and an art history. So I'm slightly skeptical as to whether there is any difference. And I think that is because let me ask it like this. What would be the difference between an artist's history and the art historian's history if both are attempting to manage memory?
Anybody want to respond to that? Of course I can talk forever, but maybe someone else would like to respond to that.
I mean, this would require taking a long look at it, but I'd be curious to know how one would read, for example, the Festac book by Chimurenga as managing memory, when I think what it does is sort of explodes memory. But I don't know if you've seen it, but I can pass it around.
I mean, I think artists' histories work with the unreliabilities of history. That's a key aspect. That the artist's history is not a question of making history usable for life. This is a philosophical question. What is the use and abuse of history for life? This is the key question. This is Nietzsche's question. What is the use and abuse of history for life? Is the use of history antiquarian? Is it critical? Or is it monumental? These are Nietzsche's three categories of history. Yeah. Is history antiquarian? like old-fashioned? Is it critical? Or is it monumental? These are the three relations to history. And I would say the artist's relation to history is to do with the things that appear not to be historical at all. The things that a historian fights against in the name of history. So we've touched on many of them: rumor, gossip, the unreliable, the unaccredited, the false, the lies, the fictions, the hate speech. I think the artist's role, artists can venture into the danger zones of memory that historians spend their time managing. Historians are the judges of history. Historians put history in the tribunal of judgment. Historians work on critique and judgment. They are Kantians, whether they know it or not. I don't think artists are Kantians, or should be. I don't think the role, this is just me, the role of artists is not only to be a critique, is not only to be a critic or a judge. There are other things that art can do. What are these things? Otherwise, is art just bad history? Is art just insufficient history? Is it just weak art history? Are artists just wannabe art historians? Or are they just historians with not enough research time? I think art is more than just weak art history, and it's more than just bad history. What else is it? What could it do? What might it do? This is the question.
I think what is interesting in that sense is also that it becomes a space where you have the history that we're not looking back, it's not something fixed and a body that we cannot touch, but it gives us the possibility to interact with the new generation, because we can be in the history, because it's something that becomes through the artist practice a present moment that we can also in a certain way change. We can change the perspectives, we can reread it, we can fail to read it also, and I think that was very beautiful also in the end moment of in the ending of the film from Buba, was really this discussion where history was not anymore, it became fluid from my point of view, and that's in certain way a very proactive and a very opening way to behave then, because we are history in that moment, but present history, and become future history.
Absolutely.
I also maybe just wanted to add something else to this dynamic, and that was from Gidri Bauli. Sorry, I forgot your name. Yeah, and when you were talking about the puppet show upstairs, you were saying that the children embody, actually you used the word, you said that the children make these costumes and masks of animals that have gone extinct and also spirits that are no longer in the forest as the forest is getting cleared. And you used the word that they reincarnate these animals. And I thought that really struck me too as a way of keeping memory, but also as a way of relating to these things that are no longer there and keeping those relations alive is really striking.
Is it okay? Yeah, okay. So these are stories that are, I mean, they hear about it from their parents or grandmothers, and maybe after 20 to 40 years, I mean, these stories even won't exist because they have mobile phones now, they watch TV, they have a completely different cultural access to other medias and everything. So, I mean, this is a phenomenal change, and I think the way they are keeping these stories and memories of their forefathers alive is the way, I mean, that was, I mean, I didn't think of that word before. It just came off instantly. Yeah, reincarnation. It's a big word, but yeah, it's kind of like that. I feel it. Yeah.
I would like to think also the possibility of event to create events. So the possibility of one event that becomes an engine that multiplies memories, multiplies events. So the funding of a cooperative, or like, for example, a starting of an irrigation system, then it becomes an event that you want to commemorate, but at the same time it multiplies and creates this generation and becomes generation. And then another thing I would like to introduce is the notion of care within this transgeneration, or like becoming a generation in different forms that goes from the care of land, or even like the legal care for artists, or various forms.
Voilà, c'est très important la question de transmission.
The question of transmission and passing on knowledge is very important.
Et moi, j'ai estimé depuis le début de notre action, il faut que la nouvelle génération voit comment nous avons fait cette coopérative.
And since the beginning of our activities, I was thinking about the fact that the next generation needed to learn from it.
Moi, ça a toujours été mon souci de laisser des traces.
It was always a concern of mine of how to leave a trace.
C'est pourquoi je suis devenu photographe.
This is why I became a photographer.
J'ai commencé à faire des photos, les foyers où, dans une pièce, on était 25.
I started taking photos in a foyer, so a shared house in France, when in one single room we were 25 personnes. 25.
Et c'est pourquoi je me suis dit, je vais faire des photos pour montrer à la nouvelle génération.
And I said to myself, I'm going to take photos to share with the new generation.
Évidemment, à l'époque, je n'étais pas conscient.
At the time, of course, I wasn't conscious of.
Mais je voulais toujours dire, j'ai dit que la vie comme on mène, il faut que les autres voient plus tard qu'est-ce que nous avons vécu comme vie en France.
Yeah, that it was important that other people saw the life that we had in France.
Donc, quand on a eu l'idée de faire la coopérative, je continue à faire des photos.
So when we had the idea of creating the cooperative, I continued to take photos.
Toujours dans les soucis historiques.
Always with a concern for the historic.
Bon, voilà, c'est pourquoi on a fait les livres et puis qui tracent dès le début jusqu'à la fin.
And that's why we've now done these books that trace from the beginning to the end. La fin.
C'est pas la fin, mais jusqu'à la fin des travaux. À la fin des travaux.
The end of the work.
Pas évidemment la fin de la coopérative, heureusement.
Luckily, not the end of the cooperative.
Voilà, c'est pour dire qu'en tout cas, les soucis de tout être humain, il faut quand même penser à ce qui va se passer plus tard après nous, parce que nous sommes malheureusement tôt ou tard, on ne sera pas là physiquement. Mais ce que nous avons fait de notre vie restera toujours.
So it's the concern of every human being, because unfortunately, sooner or later, we won't be here. And la dernière partie, j'ai pas.
Ce que nous avons fait de notre vie restera toujours.
But what we've done with our life will always remain.
It's very interesting of what you said, like what we've done with our lives, it will remain. Because when writing history, I think it's important to think when we are writing, if we are writing to close a subject or to open it. And this has a lot to do with when you are working with memories are fluid. So the history that you are telling or trying to transmit, it has also to have its fluidity. And in this process of writing history to close a subject, I think that's the problem, because then it cannot transmit to any other, to art historians, to artists, and so on, to work with, because when you wrote, you already closed the subject, but didn't open actually, so other people to continue that history and to express in other ways. I don't know if it makes that much sense.
Can I ask about this question of transmission and intergenerational transmission? So I think one key way of that, I might just move forward, is through education. And education, depending on your context, often happens within institutions which embody a lot of the structural inequalities and injustices that the societies they live in. I think perhaps, I was going to say historically, traditionally maybe, art history and history have had these like truth values attached to them because they have a certain methodology that's, in inverted commas, transparent or reliable. But for me, that word truth that has nothing to do with truth. That's a methodological thing. That's about justificationism rather than truth. And obviously, with that transmission, there's students and teachers within the institution, or, you know, it doesn't have to be. And I'm just wondering how, say, students can be equipped to challenge these authorities within the institutions that they're in, or within the educational context that they're in. Or maybe alongside that, how teachers can not instill them in that process of transmission.
Does anybody else want to, does anybody else want to respond to that point? It's really quite a critical question about the pedagogy of transmission and the stakes of the student and the teacher as the kind of fundamental relation within that. Maybe I'll just say a bit and then we can just keep the conversation going a bit longer. I mean, I think students often confront tutors with the breakdown in intergenerational transmission. That breakdown is already a demand. That breakdown says something has gone badly wrong. Something's gone wrong. That's why there's a breakdown. Often around that breakdown are complex psychic states. Often there's crime. There's a crime at stake. Shame, embarrassment, silencing. You know, the nature of the breakdown itself is charged. We could say it's loud. It's a loud silence. You know, and the tutor has to work out methods for staying in this loud silence and working out methods for inviting their students to build a relation to it, not to overcome it, but to work with it. Often there are profound reasons why the breakdown has happened. Because this breakdown is not individual. It's not one person's fault. It's not in our heads. It's symbolic, social, and political. It often has to do with the founding of the nation itself. The foundation of the nation is, at the same time, most nations are born in flames. They are. And the silences come from this genesis. And the silences are passed on as much as the knowledge. So when students confront tutors, tutors confront themselves. You know, I would say the end of Buber and Raphael's film is the moment when what we see is what Edouard Glissant calls the prophetic history of the present. This is his formulation from Caribbean poetics. He says that the colonial peoples of the Caribbean find themselves forced to narrate the prophetic history of the present. You can hear in that sentence, the future, the historical, and the present have all become linked. this is what happens at the end, where they step into the present and narrate the past as an ongoing present, which is being passed on to us, the viewers, now, in 2020, a film that was made in 2018 about events that happened in 1972. This circulation between 1972, 2018, and 2020, between the events of, between the locations of Paris, locations of Mali, locations of Senegal, and locations in Bangladesh, this circulation of times and spaces, these are the kinds of the practices of articulation required to not so much repair the breakdown, but to inhabit it and to stay in it for as long as is necessary. Because within the breakdown is some kind of dangerous danger. You know, like large forces are at stake in those silences. And I think a lot of art is about inventing methods for staying with the danger of the breakdown. Thank you. Anybody else? In that case, maybe we should...
What does he want to say?
Does this fellow want to say something?
Okay.
Would you like to speak?
This is the last comment.
Priti Sarman, educated from American University, recognized representative from United Nations, Bangladeshi citizen. First, I thanks to you all to come in our country on behalf of Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and the DG of National Arts Academy, giving you opportunity, open discussion of this silent place. I'm so much happy to looking your nice and significant discussion. Everybody expresses the respective view, interesting and significant discussion of this silent. I'm so much glad, actually. I would like to inspire you. Our session and our continue fairs for the foreigners will be open opportunity for them to get the available time to discuss all the mind-created planning discussion of this silent place. On behalf of Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, is trying hardly to give it the opportunity to the foreigners. And he ensured to pass their lives, to giving the good opportunity. The foreigners may come our country, may pass independently, may get the right to discuss, open discussion, their significant effect. I'd like to thank all of you, the various countries people you have come together, arranged nice discussion today. I have been traveled 93 countries as a recognized representative from the United Nations headquarters, educated from American University, supporting the vital issue of Rohingya. It's a very vital issue for the Bangladeshi citizen. They are living illegally more than 2 years. Government's trying hardly to repatriate to the Myanmar from Bangladesh. Government as well as trying to give the opportunity for the foreign people to come, inform the welcome to our Bangladesh, to look our climate scenery. And thank you very much. Just as a Bangladeshi citizen, I offer my heartiest thanks to come our Bangladesh, can discuss your significant respective point discussion. Many, many thanks to you, giving this, dropping some topics.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Kodwo. Thank you, Buba, Kewai, Farid, Moshon, Sonia, for staying, because you've been talking all day. Kewai, yes, I said Kewai. And thank you to everybody, all of you, for coming and for staying with us during the whole day. This was an amazing day that we had all together. Amazing stories that have been shared from the African continent, from Asia, and we are very, very happy to have this opportunity. Tomorrow is our last day of symposium. We have the fourth panel that will be in the morning, starting at 10. No, we have the performance at 10. We have a performance at 10 with Joy Deep and the Hill Group. And then after that, we have the panel on the death of the collective, talking about the end of the collective, but also its possible transformation, and talking about the legacy of it, the fact that even though there is no physical manifestation today of a certain collective, there is a legacy that is left and that has inspired the creation of other initiatives, and those are usually forgotten about. We would like to really have the opportunity to share about that, together with Merv Espina from Green Papaya, Emeka Okereke from Depth of the Field, and Dali Al-Mamoun from the Shomwe Group. Thank you and have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you, Marie-Hélène. And Dulcie.